Hello, one and all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. This is your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino. Stroffolino, editor with Gestalt IT. It's a tricky name, even for me, and I've been saying it for 33 years. Joining me from across this great nation of ours is my own personal bare metal instance, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, thanks for being on the show today. How are you?
I am great, Rich. It's good to be back with you this week.
Fantastic. Yeah, so let's get rock and rolling. We have a jam-packed show, lots of good news here. And I thought we'd start out with something interesting from Ars Technica. Joshua Tarberer with Ars Technica outlined how he actually used GitHub to make a pull request on a typo found in the code of DC. That's like the legal code of Washington, DC. And it was accepted. This was a result of the Washington, DC using GitHub as an authoritative source for storing the law and uses it to feed directly onto all of their city websites and stuff like that. This process was created by the Open Law Library and could be used as a model for treating laws as code. This isn't someone going in and just creating laws whole cloth. There are still all of the frameworks and committees and stuff like that that would go into creating these laws. But in terms of maintaining and allowing for accuracy and for kind of doing this kind of maintenance stuff, is this a good idea, Tom?
I think it's actually a really great idea because a lot of people out there, especially the ones who are more open source minded, are willing to help you with the little things like correcting typos. I was just a little bit worried when I first read the story from ours because they're like, yeah, we changed the law through a GitHub pull request. I'm like, oh, Lord, we are in trouble now. But I mean, when you think about it, if you mess something up and it's kind of embarrassing, like you accidentally copy the text of the Constitution and it becomes "be the people," you want somebody to fix that as quickly as possible when they see it. And GitHub is probably the best framework to do that.
Yeah, and the big thing is here, whoever is the maintainer of that, which is presumably some sort of civic authority or leads, some sort of civic process leads to whoever is actually pressing accept on those pull requests, has to all be in place. It's not just someone sitting there going like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I could see this being really useful. I used to work for a bankruptcy law firm, and there was actually one
Mhm.
piece of the Ohio Revised Code that was causing major problems because it was punctuated weird and people were unsure how to respond to that, and it was part of dealing with some minutia, legal minutia, but that ended up having real world consequences. And having something like this where you could dynamically kind of go like, how are we supposed to should this be here or not, does this semicolon really need to be here or whatever, and having that be a speedier process could definitely save some time and would be really interesting.
I agree.
All right, next up, Justin, we thought everything was safe. Dutch security research group ViewSec recently published findings that ECC memory is susceptible to a row hammer attack. If you're not familiar, a row hammer attack is basically a really low level attack that runs a program repeatedly on a row of transistors in memory, causing electrical leakage into adjacent rows and flipping bits stored there. It's gets pretty technical, but it's also pretty nasty and basically impossible to prevent unless you, I guess, completely replace all the memory or you completely re-architect how the memory works. Basically, as long as you have the memory that you have installed in your server or whatever, it's going to be susceptible to this. With proper mapping, this can be used to gain a system or data access. So like I said, pretty nasty. The researchers found that just flipping one bit would automatically get caught by the error correction, kind of the EC in the ECC memory. 2 bits would completely crash programs, but flipping 3 bits simultaneously did not trigger any error correction, which is really weird. This opens the door to basically every documented row hammer attack, which presumably ECC memory up to this point was thought to be immune from. It does take much more time to map these kinds of attacks, requiring a week or more to execute. And because ECC isn't really a standard, it's proprietary to every memory manufacturer. It's not necessarily directly repeatable, but theoretically now, we have row hammer attacks that could be executed against ECC. Tom, how big of a deal is this? And, will it, what are the repercussions of this?
Well, it's big because it's proven that something we thought was a bastion before is no longer a bastion. But at the same time, you kind of have to look at this from the perspective of let me mangle a Fight Club quote. On a long enough timeline, the security of any project is effectively zero because given enough time and enough resources, you really can attack anything. I mean, sure, it's probably not as elegant as taking a sledgehammer to a combination lock, But, given enough time, people will figure out how to do this. So what does that mean? It means effectively that we're going to have to look for a replacement for ECC memory in some form or another, or we're going to have to open the standard so that people can do audits of that to find these bit flipping attacks. They also need to figure out why 3 bits is undetectable, but 2 bits crashes everything. Maybe they just start using it as a denial of service attack. And maybe we start looking for ways to detect row hammer as opposed to just hoping and praying that we don't get caught with it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the researchers pointed out this isn't necessarily going to affect, kind of the reliability of ECC. So, for financial transactions, stuff like that, it doesn't make it any less reliable. I do wonder if, the way ECC is architected that, because 1 bit flips are probably the most common just to randomly happen, and those are the things that are going to be caught. That's what the priority is. Yeah, I completely agree that opening up the standard would be huge, or making it a standard as opposed to every memory manufacturer being proprietary. That'll probably never happen, and we'll just ignore it. And then, there'll be a massive hack of a financial institution. No big deal.
What's the worst that could happen?
Well, you could be Dominic Tarr, Tom,
wow.
and he's receiving a little bit of blowback. Basically, he was formerly the maintainer of the event stream NPM module hosted on GitHub. Some people noticed recently some really odd behavior from that model related to cryptocurrency. Essentially, it looks like there was going to be some crypto jacking going on in the background. It turns out what happened was that Dominic transferred control of the module to an unknown third party that volunteered to maintain it. The person then inserted a backdoor that would cause you to mine cryptocurrency and put it into their wallets. Efforts to figure out what was going on have met with stonewalls and AES encrypted code blocks. So that's really encouraging. This all raises a really interesting question for the open source community. Who is ultimately responsible for something that they've created after they move away from it? And I'm reminded of what was the encryption software that was used that you could it was like the standard that everyone would remind me of. This reminded me so much of this. Essentially, it would let you put up like a separate partition that was totally encrypted and undetectable by law enforcement. And the developers stepped back from that because they were like, listen, child pornographers and like really horrible people are using this. And we don't want to be responsible for, like, we're keeping it up partially for them. And that makes us feel really terrible. Yeah, Tom, is there any clean answer for this?
There's not. And hat tip to Matt Oswalt for pointing this out on Twitter, because he's the one who brought the article to our attention. Are you responsible for owning this? I mean, when you build a program and you sell it, there's a responsibility that you have to the program because there's a contract and an end user licensing agreement. And so I can come back to you and sue you for breach of contract if you step away from it, or worse, you put a backdoor in the software. Look at all the problems that companies like Cisco and Dell have had with backdoors in their software recently. But if this is freely available on the internet and people are using it, what happens when I get tired? What happens when I want to step away? I mean, Linus has tried it a few times with Linux, and well, they just keep dragging him back in. This is something relatively innocuous. I mean, Event Stream, there was another module that it called that also exhibited the same problems. Dude just wanted his life back, and so he walked away from it. And the people who took it over, now, okay, selling this to some shady dude in the parking lot on Craigslist is probably not the best way to do it. But I mean, you had no idea that these people were going to get shady about it. What are you going to do? Take it back? I mean, he basically threw up his hands on GitHub. It's like, this is not my problem anymore. Figure it out.
Well, I think the answer to this, or at least partially, maybe a way to mitigate this, is more community, right? If you want to step away from something like this, be extremely vocal, that being like, hey, I'm stepping away. This party is taking over from it. I hate to say leave it open for comment, because that could turn into a cesspool real quick. But the idea being like, hey, I'm going to step back, hand the reins of maintenance over to this organization, to this person, or whatever. If you have a problem with it, you might want to find something else to use in the meantime, or, not accept any updates or anything like that. I feel like more communication is generally the answer when it comes to open source. Still, though, that puts even more onus on the original maintainer. Is that a deterrent to developing open source in the future? If you don't want that to, if you're the minor success of something that isn't going to make you a lot of money, or any, becomes a kind of a millstone around your neck. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, it wouldn't be a Gestalt IT rundown if we didn't talk about Huawei and the U.S. government a little bit. This seems to come up all the time because it turns out a little bit contentious. The Wall Street Journal reports that American officials are briefing allied governments and foreign telecom executives to avoid using telecommunications equipment from Huawei. Governments briefed include Germany, Italy, and Japan, among others, as these governments are considering making long-term capital investments in 5G. The U.S. government is reportedly considering subsidizing the purchase of telecom equipment from non-Chinese providers to key allies. So it's getting so dire that the US is like, listen, we will pay for your 5G, just don't, or we'll give you a discount if you buy it from Nokia, don't buy it from Huawei. And I think this is really important to point out. The US is basically alone in the world in not depending on Huawei. If you look at especially across Asia, but even in Europe, they're a substantial telecom communications provider along with headsets and a lot of other equipment. Really, the U.S. is the outlier here, and they've been very, very vocal about, really not wanting to trust Huawei. That the call seemingly hasn't been heard anywhere else in the world to a certain degree. Tom, what is the likelihood this is going to work, given that there's really only two or three, maybe two other companies that other governments can look to buy from?
What's the likelihood it's going to work? Let's put a dollar amount to it, because that's really what this comes right down to. For the German government, for the French government, they don't care. I mean, okay, yes, there have been accusations that Huawei is embedding software and hardware in their devices to capture information and send it back to China. Okay, well, there's no guarantee that the U.S. isn't doing this. Thanks to Edward Snowden, we found out about 5.5 years ago that we were doing that. So, I mean, it's not like we're the ones standing on a shining hill going, everyone else who's doing this is bad. So it's a matter of who do you trust? And it's a matter of who do you want to make your bet on in the future? Because let's face it, at this point, it's the two largest economies in the world that are going to war with each other over specific technology. The difference is that we're encouraging people to use literally any other thing than Huawei, and the Chinese government is doubling down on Huawei because they have a huge investment in getting their, one of their golden telecom people out there. I don't have an answer. I think that the government's going to have to dig pretty deep to subsidize to make this appealing enough to hurt the Chinese, to make them take a second look at this. Likewise, if the Chinese really want to get market share or mind share, they just drop the price to almost nothing.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of options for Huawei to kind of sweeten the pot beyond the point where, other than maybe having some political consequences to it down the line. But I haven't heard any talk that's going to get that serious, quite that quickly. I mean, these are very, the countries listed in the Wall Street Journal report, really central allies to the U.S. I really doubt, we'd burn any bridges. Although, given the political climate, who knows? Speaking of one of those allies that was listed in that report, the German Federal Office for Information Security has published a draft of rules for securing small office and home office routers, aka SOHO routers. Not ones found in New York, evidently. Routers that follow the rules could include a certification sticker on the product that indicates compliance. So they get a sticker if they're good people. Among the rules are the requirement for Wi-Fi passwords of 20 digits or more, restricted service on WAN, and warnings about out-of-date or end-of-life firmware. Tom, what's the read on this here? Will this establish Will this establish best practices, kind of across these manufacturers, or will it codify rules that will inevitably age out of relevance?
A little bit of both. I mean, realistically speaking, first of all, you got to hand it to the Germans. They make great cars and good Wi-Fi rules, as it turns out. But this is a catch-22 that you always run into. Well, if I write it down, as soon as I've written it down, it's out of date. Well, so what the other alternative is just not write it down, and it's all just common tribal knowledge that gets passed down from one admin to the next. Why do we make the password 20 characters? Well, back in my day, it's better to have it written down in a document somewhere. We can always modify the documents. Maybe we can use GitHub to keep them up to date. But the fact is that as we move forward, and this is something we're seeing in the security world all the time. Look at the Rowhammer attack. Yeah. 3 months ago, we thought ECC was invulnerable to it. Today, it's not. Does that invalidate deploying ECC? No, it doesn't. There are a lot of other uses for it. Likewise, does knowing that home routers are vulnerable to attack invalidate deploying them? Absolutely not. What it means is we need to make people smart. We need to educate people about that. And every little bit helps. And hats off to the Germans for taking a look at this. I wish somebody else would have stepped up and done it earlier, but, well, we'll go with what we got.
I do think it's really interesting. Some of the reporting I've seen on this was that there's a little bit of pushback from some community groups and kind of activist groups in Germany, the Chaos Computer Club and the Open, was it WRT, software project. Were kind of saying, hey, there really should be, why don't we put in rules that say if you're going to end of life your firmware and you're not going to provide any more security updates, that you have to allow for third party, firmwares to be installed on your device, or at least provide the option, or actively put on the box of the router that says, hey, this is going to be end of life firmware as of, next year or next month or something like that. Or it's already this discount router has already reached the end of life at, kind of the expiration date, maybe on the router. Would be an interesting take. I doubt we'll see that happen given the relative power of, kind of power imbalance between the two groups. One thing that I found was really interesting, kind of perusing the rules, there's a mandate that all, by default, WPA2 has to be the security standard kind of on these routers. No mention of WPA3, even though that's available. They're certifying new routers. I just thought it was weird that, like, hey, when WPA3 is maybe ratified or certified or available, or for new routers, again, kind of something that probably is going to be updated next year or something like that. But I thought that was interesting. So, Tom, I don't know if you heard about this little trade show that's going on right now, or has it just wrapped up? I forget. It kind of consumes all oxygen in the room. A little something called AWS reInvent. This bizarrely capitalized event really is. It's almost impossible to kind of keep track of all of the announcements from reInvent. My favorite thing is like 2 weeks after, where they, all the blogs are like, oh yeah, this thing that we didn't notice is a huge deal, and getting to find out about that. But I thought we would run down some of the announcements from reInvent and kind of get a big deal, no big deal kind of take from you, Tom. Does that sound good?
That works for me.
All right, first one up, we have a little something called AWS Ground Station. Now, I've been of the opinion that because AWS is so dominant, they're able to kind of go after a little bit more of these, I don't even want to call them niche markets, but really specific use cases for AWS. I think we may have found one here. Amazon now has a ground station as a service offering. AWS Ground Station will let people make use of Amazon's network of antennas and dishes to move data from space into AWS. Pricing will be set by the minute for downlink time. Tom, big deal, no big deal?
Snowballs in space.
It's like they couldn't get the semi truck on stage, so they're like, how about space?
Yeah, pretty much. I think this is actually a big deal for developing markets. This basically opens up the entirety of Africa and middle of Asia where there is nothing. So now you can go run a science project or some kind of investigative work, and then you can uplink your data back to AWS and start crunching it right away. So by the time you get out of the wilderness and back to civilization, your analysis is done. I like it.
I do wonder about the cost if that becomes effective, although I guess if it becomes popular, they build, ground stations, closer to those areas and, cause and effect.
You have to ask about the cost. This is not product for you.
This is true. All right. How about AWS Global Accelerator? This optimizes end user performance. Traffic enters at the nearest edge location, routes to the closest application endpoint within the AWS global network with further optimization routing to the user. Basically, it's kind of doing specialized application acceleration and kind of removing more global constraints from kind of where you're starting to where you're ending. Customers can also prioritize weights like geographic distance and application health into how the global accelerator works, which I actually thought was a really cool feature. Big deal, no big deal.
Welcome to the SD-WAN world, Amazon. This is something that companies like Viptela, VeloCloud, and a lot of other providers have been focusing on for years. Some of them call it cloud on-ramp or cloud offload. Basically, what they're doing is they're using policy-based routing to find the closest edge endpoints and routing your traffic over there. Some companies just got Sherlocked. This will be a bigger deal later on. I think it's a good thing, though.
Do you think there is a reason that they avoided specifically kind of the direct comparison to SD-WAN, or is this obvious to anyone that would be in the market for that?
It's kind of obvious to me.
Okay.
This is a feature that they're trying to downplay the fact that you can get it on other networking hardware. They don't want competition.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. How about AWS Transit Gateway? This is Amazon's approach to hub and spoke network topology, providing a single ingress/egress point for the edge with control over routing and security. Each transit gateway would support up to 5,000 VPCs. Kind of similar there, Tom?
Yeah, pretty similar. This is Amazon realizing they need to move down to the edge. They can't just be a bastion in Virginia and Oregon anymore. They've got to get close to people if they want to start doing that ingestion. And honestly, all those rumors that we were starting to see 6 months ago about Amazon making enterprise edge switches, I mean, this is kind of them moving in that direction. Now, I'm not saying they're making an enterprise edge switch yet. I'm saying that they're getting ready to move into the enterprise data center itself.
Yeah, it's a really meaty hybrid announcement there. One that really caught my eye here was the Amazon announced the AWS Graviton processor, an Amazon-designed ARM chip. These will be available in EC2A1 instances across select regions. I think the East, the West, and the usual suspects. They'll roll out as time goes on. They claim up to 45% lower costs on specific workloads and should be able to run apps written for Amazon, Linux, Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, and Ubuntu. Interestingly, the Register reported that AMD was actually originally tasked to kind of build this ARM chip. They botched the execution, as AMD has historically done over the past decade, and so that never happened. But I thought was interesting. Big deal, no big deal. I know you've been skeptical about ARM in the data center, Tom.
I have been a little bit because it involves a huge, massive shift. You don't just drop things on ARM and have them run overnight. You have to re-architect them. This is Amazon trying to capture the ARM development market. Somebody posted on a Slack channel the other day, "Oh, this is the end of Intel's dominance." No, this isn't. For the same reason, you can still buy buggy whips. What I do think this means, though, is that people are looking to make a migration to the cloud are going to start looking very hard at re-architecting the software to run across multiple different providers or multiple architectures. So yeah, if I can port my stuff to ARM, then I know that if I can run it in ARM in my data center, I can run it in ARM on the cloud. And the cost thing is, it's negligible at this point. 45% cheaper. Congratulations. You're still going to buy more, and your bill's going to end up being the same. So big deal, but it's going to need to be proved out to be a big deal overall.
Yeah, I think there might be an actual opportunity, again, because you have the gravitational pull, no pun intended, of AWS. You're already looking at, basically everyone's kind of coming to the realization we're gonna have to re-architect all of our apps anyway if we really want them to run well in the cloud and to be cost effective that way. So maybe that starts the conversation of hey, maybe we can make these work on ARM as well. And it's a little easier than just going from scratch for your own data center, I think. How do we feel about Graviton as a name for a processor? A little too grandiose, or do we like that?
Oh, it's got a certain pull to it.
But all right. Next up, we have Amazon making its internal ML engineer education courses free to all devs through AWS. That includes 45 hours over 30 courses, and Amazon is making their ML certification half price. Is this Amazon just saying, hey, we're putting out some ML resources, we need people to consume them, here's some education?
Pretty much. This is getting people on the ML bandwagon, and I'm glad that they called it ML and not AI.
What's really cool about this for me is, you see stories of, people that made just weird, bizarre AI or, deep learning or whatever apps because they watch a tutorial on YouTube about how to get started and they kind of were fooling around and kind of figured it out. Amazon putting these out there, yeah, you have to, you have to kind of be in the AWS ecosystem to access it. But I mean, that just requires a credit card. You don't even have to spend anything. So, could open up these kind of resources because they start from a very low level from, everything I was reading and make it pretty accessible to kind of ramp up from there. So, it could be interesting to really bring new people in there. I appreciate it being free, at least. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right, how about Amazon RoboMaker, a central dev platform to build, test, deploy robotics application, and will provide easy integration to AWS Recognition. That's their kind of image and video recognition engine. AWS Poly for speech synthesis, which is kind of weird, and Lex, which is speech recognition, I believe. Basically putting an echo into potentially robots, Tom. Big deal, no big deal.
Cyberdyne Systems Series 101 Skynet Terminators, now powered by Amazon. This one's a long bet. I can see them, the endpoint node doesn't matter. Okay, kids build robots, people build robots, big deal. Amazon's looking at data ingestion. Everything produces data. Data needs to be stored. Storage costs something, and that's kind of what they're looking at. And then, of course, the ML software and running analytics against it. Oh, look, we need instances to do that. Okay, great. It made for good gift. People were handing out little Lego robot things. More power to them if they can make this take off. But this is like starting a rocket company because you have a lot of extra money and don't have anything else to do. Oh wait, Jeff Bezos already did that. So okay, great. Robot rockets that spread the Washington Post everywhere. I don't know. What's the end game?
Yeah, this is one of those announcements where I don't know quite enough about like kind of the robot development, application space to really kind of get a handle on how significant this will be. But again, because Amazon has this huge lead, they can kind of spend the resources to develop something like this, and it potentially gives them again a more specific niche than Azure or Google Cloud or something like that can provide. So very interesting. Speaking of which, there's some interesting announcements with Amazon trying to get maybe some HPC customers to move to the cloud. AWS created instances designed for specifically for machine learning. The new P3DN GPU and C5N compute instances both provide 100 gigabit per second networking, which should allow for large data sets to be routed between nodes much more efficiently than previously allowed. This basically builds off of the previous P3 and C5 instances and just adds that extra networking capability. That combined with AWS Elastic Fabric Adapter, which allows for VMs to share data over low latency interlinks. Tom, is this going to convince some HPC people to maybe move to the cloud?
I think it's going to be more along the lines of getting HPC people to move to Amazon's cloud. There's a lot of people that have been doing a lot of great work trying to get people to move to HPC clusters. I mean, Gina, our friend over at VMware, has really been banging this drum a lot, and she's got some really good arguments to move your HPC stuff to what they're doing. So this is Amazon trying to capture that market. I don't know. Yeah. The funny thing is unlike Google, Amazon doesn't publicize whenever they kill projects like this. So, maybe they'll get like 7 or 8 customers and it'll work, and maybe it'll just disappear next year into a snowmobile full of snow rockets or something.
Yeah, just one day those instances just magically disappear. All right, and
Pretty
last but
much.
not least, some really a ton of IoT-based announcements. I'll just run through this in one block here, and we'll get a big deal, no big deal. AWS IoT Sitewise, it's a service that collects, organizes, and structures data from industrial IoT devices. IoT Events, basically a sensor monitoring suite. IoT Things Graph, which allows for drag and drop linking of sensors to services, which I think is really cool, and IoT Greengrass Connectors, which allows for third-party services like ServiceNow or Splunk to kind of tie in to IoT devices. Big deal, no big deal. AWS are really going after IoT, industrial IoT specifically.
Whoever named it Internet of Things Graph needs to be shot. Beyond that, IoT is a thing. I've been told it's a thing. Okay, great. My Nest can talk to my speaker now. Okay. I don't know how we're going to fix this problem, realistically speaking. Okay, they're getting ahead of it. All right. I really don't know what this is going to be about.
Well, this is kind of handing off, because we hear like IoT is going to ruin everything because you get all this, streaming data that you're never going to be able to handle and process. Like, just send it all to the cloud. Amazon does things and we get reports. I mean, that's, basically the punt that Amazon is maybe depending on. And, this is specifically designed for factory IoT. So, you have a sensor looking if your conveyor belt's running, you have a sensor that's, checking your widgets as they come through or something like that. So this isn't necessarily, hey, the Amazon Echo that we have in the conference room or something like that. Although theoretically, I guess Amazon would be more than happy if you did have one, and I'm sure would collect some kind of metrics to make you happy as well. Mm-hmm. So, Tom, of those announcements, what do you think is potentially the biggest announcement from AWS that you've seen, or something that we didn't cover?
Right now, it's probably sitting on top of ARM and the network gateway stuff. ARM because, well, it's ARM. If you want to know why ARM is such a big deal, go read Stephen Foskett's post on gestaltit.com about the new iPad and the fact that Apple's basically gearing up to replace the Intel chips in their Macs with ARMs. Not legs, because that would be weird. But I think the networking pieces are going to be a big deal down the road, not just because I'm the networking nerd, but because the biggest impediment now to getting people in the cloud is not figuring out how to make the cloud work. It's how to get your stuff into the cloud or how to make people use the cloud effectively. And that's where you need kind of a little bit more networking expertise on the edge. And I know some internal folks at Amazon have been busting their butts to get this stuff working. So kudos to them for getting this stuff out there and kind of going after that market that's still being underserved by Amazon.
Do you think, given kind of this focus on maybe approaching the the edge networking instances that we're going to see some more acquisitions from Amazon in 2019 along these lines. We've dealt with a number of companies that are kind of, dealing with this in different ways. You mentioned the glut of SD-WAN companies kind of doing something very similar to what Amazon's already doing. Do you think we'll see one of them get acquired by AWS? We've seen, several of them, VMware soaked up a couple of them. So, what are we doing here?
Well, Oracle just bought Talari, and Talari was essentially a service provider for SD-WAN, and that's everybody that looked at it said, "Oh, it's an on-ramp to their cloud." And given Amazon's relationship with Oracle and Oracle Cloud, see also the keynote slide from today with Larry's head popping out of nowhere. I don't know that they're gonna buy them. Amazon is in the same space that Google and Facebook are in right now. They have teams, legions of people sitting around with nothing better to do than to solve a hard problem. I think you're going to see feature sets, but I don't think you're going to see acquisitions to get those feature sets. Or if you do, they're going to buy very early stage features that are components. Look at more like the Apple model. We didn't develop Face ID. We bought a company that did, but we didn't tell you we bought them until we came out with a product that actually did it. I can see that being their model. You're not going to see any big splashes. Not like Oracle trumpeting the fact that they bought somebody.
Well, I mean, but there's always the Instagram option where you buy your competitor before they're really competing against you, before regulatory authorities can stop them from being bought. But I think that's a really interesting point, because I do think, especially Facebook seems that's like their strategy is, we're not going to invent something that's going to directly compete in terms of market share immediately, but we're going to muddy the market enough that this company can't gain dominance. And so then they'll flounder when all their VCs get angry at them for not getting the massive return that they were expecting. So that's an interesting thought on Amazon's approach. And I don't think you are incorrect necessarily, although I'll be keeping an eye for any acquisitions going forward. Tom, thank you so much. Where can people find more of your great stuff if they're interested in finding out your great stuff? I kind of circled over there.
Well, I'm almost in as many places as Amazon at this point. You can follow me on Twitter and other social media. I'm at Networking Nerd.
That's the cloud.
That's the cloud. You can follow me on my blog on WordPress, which at this point is probably hosted on Amazon somewhere. That's networkingnerd.net. You can also follow us on gestaltit.com. I actually wrote a post today about our upcoming security field day event in December, where we might be exploring some of these ideas around, bit flipping and backdoors and code and stuff like that. So stay tuned for some more great information coming there. Beyond that, I mean, if you need anything, just hit me up on Twitter. I can answer questions. I also have a really great pumpkin pie recipe that I'm willing to share with you.
Well, look for that at Networking Nerd. You can find me at Mr. Anthropology. That's MR Anthropology on the tweets, and also writing on gestaltit.com. We'll be back next Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, running down the IT news of the week. I think we're going to take off the week of Christmas. I don't think we'll be here for the week of Christmas, and the week of we'll be here for the week of New Year's, I think.
We got to be here the week of New Year's, because we got to do all of our 2019 predictions, right?
Yay! By the way, you're gonna have to message Mel about that pumpkin pie recipe. She just is asking us about that. So until next time we run down the IT news of the week, have a super sparkly day.